Saturdays from 10 to 2. So today we are going to have our lunch and learn with Dr. Mark Ryan. He's Elon University Professor of Sport Management, with the topic of Textile Leagues and Minor League Baseball in Alamance County. And Mark has an extensive background in baseball. He was general manager with the Burlington Indians, and also worked in athletics with Burlington Rec and Park. So I'll let him tell a little more about himself and what he has going on in the world of baseball. But Mark Ryan, you can take it away.
Thanks, Brandy. Well, thank you all for having me today. Always appreciate the chance to talk baseball. That's a good thing. I've got to stay caffeinated. Very important part of the process. So as Brandy mentioned, my name is Mark Ryan. I teach sport management at Elon. I worked in the industry for a long time, though, and mostly worked in baseball. I helped found the Coastal Plain League, which is a summer college league that plays in a lot of old minor league ballparks. And started out mostly in North Carolina, now it's in South Carolina, Virginia as well. And I would say that's really the job where I started getting my hands on history of baseball in this part of the country. When that league started, it was summer college baseball, so it's similar to what we now have. I did want to touch on a little bit of kind of the current landscape of baseball in the county. What we have now in Burlington, we have the Burlington Sock Puppets in place of what used to be the Indians and the Royals. And the Sock Puppets are a summer college league, so these are college players that are playing for more experience, and a chance to get scouted during their summer break in school. Yeah, that's right. They're all college players. Yeah. And there's varying levels. The most famous of those kind of leagues is the Cape Cod League. That's usually full of top level talent, and there's a whole pecking order. But when I helped the Coastal Plain League get going, that was really kind of my introduction to history of baseball in this state. Because of course, if we're going to think about where can we put a team, we would look at the historical records and say we used to have a team, we used to draw reasonably well. We wound up in places like Wilson and Thomasville and Edenton and all these other places that have been pretty successful. So that was kind of where I got my hands around the history. And then certainly when I came to Burlington, I was with Coastal Plain League for many years. And then I had a chance to come to Burlington and run the baseball team here. You guys may know that the baseball team here, when it was created in 1986, it was the Burlington Indians. And it was owned by Miles Wolff. Miles Wolff had owned the Durham Bulls. He had come on in.
Hey, thank you. I've been here 15 minutes, but I thought,
Okay. Well, there's a chair for you right there.
all right.
But Miles had been real successful. He had founded the Durham Bulls back in 1980, and that was kind of when everyone thought minor league baseball was a losing proposition. At one point, you could make a go of it. And Miles was real successful in Durham with the Bulls. And then after a few years, he started looking at other opportunities to place teams. And in I believe it was 1983, he took a lease on the Burlington Athletic Stadium, which at the time, some of you, if you grew up here, may remember it was called Fairchild Stadium at the time. And he took a lease on Fairchild Stadium. And I think when I ran the team, it was a very cooperative relationship between the team and the city. And some places, the team and the city relationship is like, I don't know, some of you have probably rented apartments where you had a bad landlord, or been landlords where you had a bad tenant. And a lot of times that landlord-tenant relationship can be tense. But the one in Burlington has always been really positive. And a lot of that has to do with, I think, the fact that when Miles took this lease on the ballpark, he actually didn't have a team put in there. He thought he was going to get a team, but he was blocked by some maneuvering by the people in Greensboro who didn't want another team right in their backyard. But he took the lease and he paid rent on the ballpark while it sat empty for a couple of years just to honor his commitment. And I think the city of Burlington took note of that. You know, Harold Owen had been involved through recreation and then the city manager. And so there's a personal relationship there and a feeling of goodwill and trust. And so eventually, of course, the Burlington Indians were created in 1986. They had great teams, you know, Jim Tomei and Manny Ramirez and Einar Diaz, Richie Sexton, a full slew of guys that went on to very successful major league careers. It was the Indians for 27 years, I believe it was. I was general manager for the last 4. I say I was general manager of the Burlington Indians for 4 years, and I was general manager of the Burlington Royals for 4 weeks. because shortly after that change happened, I decided to take a job with the city of Burlington. And that's where I had the chance to work with Brandy, of course, for both Burlington recreation employees. And that was really one team leaving and the other coming in. It could have very easily been that Burlington was left without a team. I felt like I was hunting for a little more stability in my life at that point. So I went to work for the city. But of course, the Royals came in. The Royals did a very good job by Burlington. They sent some talent through there. Salvador Perez, probably the most notable. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. He played in Burlington. Will Myers, who was a current star for the San Diego Padres, came through Burlington. So Kansas City sent some good talent through. Well, then, of course, in recent times, as some of you may remember, it depends on, I guess, how closely you follow the industry and follow baseball and how close you read your sports and news pages. But right before COVID happened, Major League Baseball started making noise about cutting down the number of minor league teams. So not to get too deep in the weeds, but pretty much major league teams will have a AAA team, they'll have a AA team. They have a high A team and a low A team, which are both full season. They play about 142 games. And then they would have rookie and short season level, which is like Burlington was an advanced rookie league. And so most of them, they had, AAA, AA, 2 full season A teams. So everybody had those 4. And then there were 3 levels below that: short season A, rookie ball, and advanced rookie. And most people had 2 of those 3. Well, the people in New York, which, most of them, I think their experience with baseball extends to boardrooms and Yankee Stadium. They decided that they needed fewer teams. They didn't think they needed as many teams to develop players. So they started threatening to take the axe to minor league baseball. Well, there was a bunch of political pressure put back on Major League Baseball. Congress was starting to get involved. It was actually one of the few things where right and left could both agree, because there were small town teams in Republican and Democratic districts. People were starting to get unified behind the idea of pushing back on this cut down of minor league baseball. But then COVID happened, and obviously everybody's attention was elsewhere, justifiably so. So in the end, what happened was during COVID, minor league teams essentially sort of became starved for revenue, starved for stability, and Major League Baseball came back and said, well, those of you who we want to keep, we'll offer contracts to, and those who we don't want, you're out of luck. And it used to be minor league baseball kind of stuck together, kind of like the labor union. Everybody was united. They kind of bargained as a block. And the COVID, the lack of revenue through the COVID years basically left teams kind of desperate. If a minor league team was invited to join a major league affiliate system, they mostly jumped at it. And so we now have a much smaller minor league system. There's only 120 affiliated minor league teams in the country. There used to be 162. And Burlington was one of the teams that got cut. So the team you see now is a summer college league. Now, Major League Baseball, in the interest of heading off lawsuits and trying to avoid bad publicity for themselves, actually has provided some financial support. They're paying some of the costs for the sock puppets that the parent team used to pay. At this level in the old rookie league, the parent team would pay for a hotel, they'd pay for the bus, meal money. Obviously, they paid coaches and player salaries, equipment. And Major League Baseball still paid for all those things. So local operators have to pay ballpark lease and the light bill on the stadium, and the grounds crew, and a lot of local expenses that Major League Baseball is taking that on. Now, they've also only committed to taking those costs on for 4 years, so we'll see what happens. Beyond that, last year was year 1, so we'll see what happens after 2 more years, whether Major League Baseball still supports it. But that's kind of the lay of the land of baseball here. This is a community that had baseball. Jumping back a little bit, the history of the stadium. Some of you may know this. The stadium, the Burlington Athletic Stadium, it was originally built in Danville, Virginia, in 1950, and Danville didn't have teams by the late 50s, and they were looking to demolish this ballpark. And at the same time, Burlington was trying to get a more permanent home for their team. They were playing in Graham at what's now Tom Zachary Field. They had an Indians affiliate, started in about, I think, 1958. And they wanted a more permanent, higher quality home for the team in the county. And so they actually bought this dismantled ballpark from Danville, and it came down here on flatbed trucks, girders, roof panels, and seats and everything. and they rebuilt, of course, the base, the concrete, the foundation of the stadium, rooms underneath were built from scratch according to the annual plans. But the superstructure, the roof and the girders and such were actually reassembled in Burlington. And that ballpark opened in 1960 with the Burlington Indians playing. Actually, they were the Alamance Indians during that era. And they had a pitcher named Louis Tion, who in 1960 set the Carolina League strikeout record. And if you're a baseball person, you know the name Louis Tion. He was a Hall of Famer as well. Long career with the Indians and Red Sox, Cuban pitcher. He was famous for being able to, if he had a good game, he would smoke a celebratory cigar in the locker room. And they said he could actually smoke a cigar while taking a shower, which I think is a remarkable skill if you've ever contemplated something like that. So anyway, so Louis Tion was one of the big names there. So that was the start. And Burlington had baseball then from 60 till 74. Some of you may remember they were the Alamance Senators after a period. And then the last year they were the Rangers. But barely anyone remembers they were the Rangers because no one was going to game time. Certainly about mid-70s, finally baseball was a real downtrodden. People weren't very interested. They were watching big league baseball on TV, sitting in the air conditioning at home. Nobody wanted to watch minor leagues in the heat. So minor league baseball is kind of on a dip. So Burlington went from 74 to 86 without a team. And then when Miles brought this team in, it was a lower level, but it was really well received. It was really a good fit. There's fewer number of games, fits people's schedules a little better. Going to a minor league baseball game in April on a Tuesday or Wednesday, that's a pretty tough task. But going during the summer, it's a lot easier for me. So that's kind of a very, very quick overview of minor league baseball in Alamance County. And I'll circle back to that. I want to try to allow some time for questions. So anybody who wants to know about that, we can talk about that. But also, when we talk about today's program, I did want to devote some time to talking about textile league baseball in Alamance County and the surrounding area, because that's an area that's, I guess, a lot less well known, you could say. Most people who are baseball fans live in this community, remember the Alamance Indians, they know Fairchild Park, Burlington Flex Stadium, they know the Burlington Indians. We have to go farther back to look at this textile baseball. And so one of the things that we see, of course, and I will tell you, I don't know if any of you are hardcore baseball people who have to be members of SABR, Society for American Baseball Research. This is a final proofing copy of an article about the ballpark in Substanville, some of the history around that is going to be published in an issue that's supposed to be coming off the printing press right now. But this is an article I wrote based on some research. I don't know, maybe he's watching, maybe Raymond Herring's watching today. Mayor Herring from down in Substanville, who was the founding mayor of Substanville. He was a big help. He knows everything about that ballpark. He grew up in that park and loves it. The fact that it's still standing is really a testament to people like him and others in the community that really want to preserve that ballpark. And over the years, figured out ways to keep it standing, keep it improved. So I just have to give a shout out to him real quick. But I did want to mention that. So there was a period, of course, in the 40s and 50s that baseball was everywhere. There were 60 minor league teams just in North Carolina. Now we have 10. And baseball was hot at all different levels. There was also a lot of textile league baseball. One of the things that you saw, and Substanville is a good example of this, is life in a place like Alamance County was built around the mill. Some of you may have worked in some of the mills at the tail end of the mill era here. Obviously they mostly shut down. Some of you may have parents or other relatives that worked there. But one of the characteristics of mill life was that everything in your life tended to revolve around the mill, right? You lived in a house that you rented from the mill, and you bought your flour and your lard and your bacon at the mill store, and you went down the street and worked at the mill and came home, and that was your life. And with this all-inclusive nature of the relationship with your employer, the mills also felt a responsibility, and there was some pressure on them to produce some recreational opportunities and some entertainment. And part of this was they wanted to make sure that they weren't losing employees. This is kind of an employee retention thing, among other things. And also, we have an era in the when we started getting into the 30s, some of you may remember there was some labor unrest all around the country, including here. And there was a point in the 30s where the flying squads were coming. Some of you may remember this as Burlington Dynamite Plot, which was appears to have been a staged Union attack on a mill. There was a lot of unrest in the area. And one of the things that the mills figured out was that they could hold off the unions if they gave their people a more higher quality of life. So one of the things that baseball was seen as was as a tool to keep people happy. And so cities or mills started sponsoring baseball teams and youth programs. It wasn't just they had a mill team. They usually would have their own little league. And of course, the park in Swepsonville was no different. That was built by the mill. Built by what was then Virginia Cotton Mills, which was the originator of the. And anybody know their Alamance County history well enough? Of course, the Alamance plaid, right, was the distinctive fabric made here that was famous all over the world. And that mill, they were producing that Alamance plaid by 1870. So this goes way back. So that mill later was renamed and became the Virginia Cotton Mill. And it was a massive operation. Thousands of people worked there, multiple shifts during the period of World War II and surrounding times. They had tons of contracts with the military. They were cranking out military garments, fabric for military garments. So it was a very prosperous mill. And even before the World War II boom. So that ballpark. How many of you have been to the ballpark in Swepsonville? Okay. So most of you, that ballpark was originally built as a ball field in 1926. So again, going way back, people have been playing baseball there for a long time. And then so it was built by the mill. It was used for mill baseball and for youth baseball. And there's records. I did some newspaper research in the archives and found records of Textile League baseball competing in this area as far back as 1934. And it was called the Central Carolina League, was the name that was very often put on these textile leagues that played around here. And so in 1934, I found some records of the team from the Virginia Mill. Sometimes they were represented in the standings in Swepsonville. Sometimes they were referred to as the Virginia Mill. And they played against, let's see, Glencoe, Burlington, Graham, and the 1935 league standing showed Greensboro Prox, which was Proximity Mills. If you know your textile history, it was a big mill in Greensboro, Swepsonville, and Burlington. And so textile baseball was going pretty strong during that era. And one of the interesting things about it, and this is one of the things that Raymond Herring filled me in on. He had some memory and knew some folks involved in school baseball. Of course, this one was an era when the mill baseball was meant as an entertainment element for people who lived in your mill village, but there was also an element of community pride. No mill owner wanted to be the person presiding over a crummy team, the same as the egos of major league owners make them want to win championships. So one of the things you see is that very often a lot of the hiring in the mills would have to do with, well, can the guy do the job? Well, kind of, but he's a great baseball player. And so in a lot of cases, you saw people being hired primarily for their baseball skills. And most teams had a core of players that were good baseball players who also happened to work in the mill, usually local people. But then there were very often people that we might call ringers who were there primarily to play baseball. Some of these people showed up periodically, maybe pushed the broom across the floor for an hour or two just to show their face. And mostly their job was to play baseball. And so it could probably be called sort of semi-pro baseball in a lot of ways, because these folks, some of them were being paid to play. So this was the state of things, and as Virginia Mills, moved into the 30s, into the 40s. In 1943, they created the Baker Foundation. They decided that all these recreation facilities they had should be set up as a separate entity from the mills, which is probably a good thing for the long haul, because obviously eventually the mills ran into financial problems. So the foundation was able to move into a new form. But they established the Baker Foundation, and it was said to be for the promotion of social and recreational activities in the village, was the founding documents. And they had some tasks set out in front of them. They set a to-do list and some goals for themselves. And they said they were going to build a community center, a playground. They were going to run adult softball leagues, and they were going to have a junior baseball program. And they also pledged to build a covered grandstand and put lights on what had been this just plain old ball field since 1926. And so in 1947, they opened this ballpark with a covered grandstand, and it's exactly the grandstand you see today. It hasn't really changed. I've always sort of had the theory that part of the reason it must have survived through all these years. Of course, somebody had been caring for it. It wasn't left idle or abandoned. But if you've been there too, it's got a gigantic roof. For the size of the grandstand, you go to the Burlington Athletic Stadium, the grandstand is the roof is just about the size of the grandstand. The one in Stubsonville even is bigger than the stands themselves. And I think it was a big part of protecting from the weather. It held up really well. As you've seen, if you've been there, it's a pretty simple grandstand. There's 5 rows of seats. A lot of grandstands are kind of have that miter shape with just 3 sections straight behind home plate, 2 flanking sections. That one is just 2, comes a kind of a V behind home plate. So it's a very simple construction, but it survived all these years. And part of it is a tribute to the people that continue to maintain and take care of it. So this Baker Foundation, which built this ballpark with funding and support from the bill, eventually gave way to a community association that took over that facility and the other recreation facilities in Stubsonville when the bill fell on hard times. And eventually, these properties wound up in the possession of the downtown of Stubsonville. It was an office in Walmart. And I think the county until pretty recently was playing athletic events there, right? Like youth baseball and such. I think maybe a little less so now because it's busy with a little more state league, right? Getting ahead of myself. But when we talk about a community standing by their ballpark, it's really a terrific example in Stubsonville. And when we think about some of the things that we hope baseball adds to the community, if you're the Burlington Indians or if you're the Virginia Mills team, baseball, when it's done the right way, when it is what it's supposed to be, it's a community builder. It gives people something to come together around. It gives people a common team to cheer for, gives them a sense of purpose, gives them entertainment, gives them quality of life. It's a wholesome family activity to do with everyone together. But it also can help give people opportunities to move on and up. Some of you may know, the name Floyd Wicker. Is that name familiar to anybody? Well, Floyd Wicker was an Alamance County guy who played in Stubsonville, saw on his way up. He made the big leagues after playing in East Carolina. There were several others that passed through there, but maybe the most notable team that the town got behind was right after they upgraded the ballpark. And of course, keep in mind they played all different levels on this field. It wasn't, now we have Springwood Park where we have the smaller fields, and we go to Davidson for larger fields and all these different facilities. In that area, you had a ball field, and when the little kids played on down some shorter bases, they used to play baseball on the same field. Well, they had a team in 1947, so right when this ballpark was open with this nice lighting system and a grandstand, they had this team of 12 and 13-year-olds that went and played in a state tournament, and they became known by the state media as the Overall Boys because these were country kids. These were kids from Stubsonville. They didn't have uniforms. They didn't have fancy baseball pants. They all wore overalls when they played baseball. And they were playing in the state tournament against better funded teams from bigger towns. But they won their age group. They won the 12 to 13-year-old age group in this state tournament. It became sort of a group of celebrities during that period. There's also some people that through the team existing in the ballpark being there, came to Stubsonville and became part of the fabric of life. Do any of you know Bob Vaughn? Know the name at least, right? The Stubsonville ballpark is on Bob Vaughn Road, and it's named for Bob Vaughn. Bob Vaughn played from somewhere else. He came to Stubsonville to play for the Mill team, settled there, and became a fan favorite, a community favorite, and eventually the road to the ballpark was named for him. He's also reported to have hit. Some of you may remember now his name his name has, I guess, elicits mixed feelings with Barry Bonds, who, regardless of your feeling about his PED use or, whether he cheated or not, still probably one of the greatest hitters that's ever lived. And he was famous for the splash home runs. He would hit a home run that would go out of the ballpark in San Francisco Bay. And they had an earlier version of those splash home runs in Substanville. If you've been there, the river's out there. And if you hit it right down the first baseline, you hit it hard enough, you've got a shot at getting into the river. It's got to be a really long poke. And the local legend is that Bob Bond was known to occasionally get a splash home run in the river on the fly. I have to put a tape measure to that. It may not be possible, but it's at least the local lore, and it makes a great story. That's it, for sure. But one of the other things, so in addition to baseball being really, I think, a community builder, there's also really a strong element of baseball in the community will very often tell the story of the community. They'll have teams and new facilities when they're prosperous, when times are harder, things will be more difficult. And certainly World War II, despite the personal loss and sacrifice of many people in the county, it was an era of real prosperity and growth economically in the county with the textile business booming. But by the time we get into the 70s, we're starting to see some of the decline of the textiles. And the Virginia mill was closed in 1970. And I don't know, any of y'all remember the fire in '89? It's supposed to have been the largest structure fire. Certainly, I found some records that said it was the largest structure fire in the history of North Carolina because it was such a big complex. It was, several 100,000 square feet under a roof. So the complex burned down. It was largely derelict at that point, but burned down. But again, in the meantime, this association had taken over the ballpark. So it's probably good that when they created the Baker Foundation, that they sort of separated it from the mill financially. And of course, the mill had closed in '70. In the meantime, we had affiliated minor league baseball in what would have been considered a pretty modern, fancy stadium up the road in Burlington. The Substanville ballpark didn't get a lot of use for many years, except recreation and youth programs. There was county league baseball being played in there. And then eventually, in more recent era, the new life that has been breathed back into that stadium has a lot to do with the rise of summer college baseball. We mentioned that the Sock Puppets are a summer college baseball team. There's also a lower level, more local league called the Old North State League. And you may or may not have heard of it, but they're sort of, I would describe them as anybody have people in their family that played travel baseball, played on a travel program. So, these tend to be all-star teams, kids that aspire to keep going on and playing at a higher level. There's a lot of kids that they play travel ball. They're probably playing college ball in a smaller program, and they still aspire to play and get better and want to play during the summer. So this Old North State League grew out of a travel organization. And so we think we can extend this, our system and our ladder one more level, and we can create a summer league for college players. And it's a pay-for-play league. If you play in the Cape Cod League or the Coastal Plain League or the new Appy League, where the Sock Puppets are, you play as an amateur. You don't get paid, but you don't pay to play. But this league is a little more like a playing travel ball, where if you had kids play travel ball in your family, you write a big check to somebody for travel ball, part of the qualifications. But it's been really good for the town of Substanville. This league came in and basically said, we need places to play. We need a full-size field that we can have regular access to. And the town of Substanville was very interested in partnering with somebody. And this league was launched right around the time that COVID was starting to break out. So they weren't going to use the ballpark for a lot of things anyway. A lot of youth programs were shut down. And so this league offered them some improvements. They improved the outfield fence, and did some field improvements in exchange for being able to use the ballpark. I would also be willing to bet that it's probably safe bet to say it's bringing a lot of people to town. There's activity at that ballpark all the time during the summer now, almost every day, and certainly driving people through town. Now, they're not going to go there and spend $1 zillion. There's not a bunch of restaurants and hotels in Substanville, but they're going to stop at the corner store and they're going to get some groceries. And it's probably good for the whole county because people are going to go up to Graham and have lunch and things like that. So that's one other thing. If baseball's done the right way, it can be a nice economic driver for the community. It can drive a lot of people in and out of town. I know during my time with the Burlington Recreation Department, geez, Springwood Park. I mean, we've never done an economic impact study, but we should, because that thing is booked from Valentine's Day until Thanksgiving, virtually every weekend. And you know, we get to use it for local ball for Monday through Thursday, sometimes Friday. But Friday, Saturday, Sunday, teams are traveling from all over the region and states and the country to play ball there, and they're all having to stay somewhere. Even if they're driving over from Charlotte or Greensboro, they're still going to have lunch. They're going to go to Alamance Crossing. So sport and baseball, this kind can be a really good economic driver. So I think the folks in Swepsonville, I think, are very happy with the arrangement. Took some costs off them. They get some improvements made, and it's really, I think, been a win-win for them. So I think they're very pleased to see their ballpark have essentially come back to life in this way, come back to life and have this high level of baseball. So if some of you are interested in getting out there, I would encourage you. You can check out the Old North State League schedule online, and you can see what's going on there. They play games there quite a bit. And actually, I have a student of mine at Elon who's been playing on Elon's club team. He's actually signed up to play in this league, so I'm planning on trying to go see him play a little bit. I think he's going to do his internship with them as well. It's also worth saying, though, that none of this could have happened if the community hadn't continued to keep the ballpark in shape. Even back in the 90s, when they were still essentially hosting mostly local baseball, they continue to put all kinds of improvements in there. In the 90s, they did a major round of work. They built picnic areas, walkways. You know, if you've been there, they have handicap accessible bathrooms, a modern concession stand. And Raymond Herring wasn't just the mayor of Swepsonville. If you know him, he's also a contractor. And so this is a guy who could not just say, you know, we need a concrete walkway here. He could, in fact, build the concrete walkway there. And so in a lot of cases, a lot of work that happened there, he did himself. I know also the Swepsonville River Park right across from the ballpark, a lot of the clearing and grading work he did himself too. And so this is a guy who really has invested a lot in the town. But again, he certainly wasn't alone. There's certainly strong community support that helped that happen. But it's a testament to the fact that the folks there were able to continue to upgrade that facility and keep it active where it was appealing to somebody like New York State. They thought it was a place where they could reasonably play baseball. So one other thing too that I'll put out there too, and I'm guessing there's probably a lot of questions, so I might go to questions pretty soon. I try to give you guys a short version, and then we can find out what it is you want to hear about. I did also want to mention, you know, I did all this research on textile baseball, and the Swepsonville ballpark's very tied to that. One of the other things I noticed and I brought these two. They came out so small. I don't know if you can even see them, but I'll pass those. If you guys want to look at those, these are copies of a couple of newspaper articles from around the time the ballpark was being upgraded and the roof was being added and such, 40s. But one of the things I noticed, I also found things like team photos and descriptions of games and things. One of the things I noticed in team photos was there was only white people, right? So the Mills had kind of a segregated workforce, and certainly the Mill teams were available to workers at the Mill, whether they were real workers or ringers who didn't really do a job. But black people largely didn't play on these teams. Black people were not playing even minor league baseball in North Carolina until a decade and a half after Jackie Robinson broke the Major League Color barrier. So progress was slow. And so one of the things this sparked for me was I basically said, well, black people had to be playing baseball somewhere. So what was going on? And I started doing some research. And if any of you know people who are of that age, maybe connected to that community, I'll have some cards with me. So I'm gathering information. I'm trying to do a follow-up article. This one really about the Swepsonville ballpark and kind of about Mill baseball history. But there was also sort of a parallel world going on of black baseball in the county. These are mostly teams that were sponsored by neighborhoods. They didn't have the Mill owner writing a check for their uniforms or bats and balls. So mostly they were scraping up money on their own, and they played in a lot of fields. One of the fields I know that was used, any of you ever seen that field on the way down to the landfill down at Austin's Course? There's that ball field there. That's an example of the kind of sort of more neighborhood fields that were being used in a lot of cases. the best documentation I found of black baseball in Alamance County is once the ballpark was built at Fairchild. You guys know the name Brody Hood? Anybody recognize that name? Brody ran a sporting goods company in Burlington. He was very involved in the baseball scene. He actually helped organize some of the textile league baseball, like the Central Carolina League. So when the Swepsonville Mill had teams playing against other areas, Brody was one of the people who helped organize that, those league meetings. Well, he also helped organize the black leagues in the area, because of course, black baseball players need cleats and balls and bats and everything too, right? So he wanted to have those folks as customers as well. And it appears that, of course, Brody was the general manager of the Burlington Indians and Burlington Senators when they were in Fairchild in the 70s, the 60s and 70s. And he started having tournaments at Fairchild, and this appears to be some of the most significant media coverage that black baseball got in this era. It was very often referred to that there was a Negro baseball tournament at Fairchild on a given weekend. Might be a preview. They would have concession stands open. And again, Brody was a business person. I don't think he really cared what the color of the people playing ball in his field or sitting in seats were. He just wanted to sell tickets and sell hot dogs and sell beer. And so there's some documentation of that once the ballpark was opened in 1960. But it's kind of it's a brand of baseball that as we moved into the 70s, black folks started to be able to play on whatever mill teams that were left. In some cases, these were like community teams that were sort of successors to the mill teams. And things started getting a little more integrated. Started having some white folks playing on the traditionally black teams. There started to be a little breakdown of that strict barrier. And now there's very little. The black baseball scene seems to have really dwindled. There's not a lot. A lot of the folks, I think, in both of those communities that would have been adult league or semi-pro baseball players in the earlier era, mostly are playing softball now because that's what's readily available. So if any of you know anything about that history, that's kind of the next thing I'm digging into. I found some newspaper documentation. I've interviewed a couple folks who are involved in these leagues, some older people. But if any of you know anything about that, I'd be very interested in it. And if you know more about the textile league stuff too, I know often a group like this, some of you may have some knowledge and some things that I didn't find in my research. So one of the ironies of publishing your research very often is then you find a bunch of stuff that you wish you had in your research, but maybe you can add it to a later version. So if some of you have some things to add on this, I'd be really eager to hear it. So I think with that, I'm sure you all have some questions. What do y'all want to know? Go ahead.
Well, I just have a couple of easy questions.
Okay.
Was the Graham team the Oneida Mill team? Was it an Oneida Mill team?
That's a good question. None of the stuff I saw identified by Bill. I saw in a lot of standings it was a Graham team identified as subsequent team. But I don't know for sure. Would you assume that was probably Oneida?
Yes. I mean, I'm guessing. I don't know. My grandfather was a mill worker at Oneida and lived in the mill house down Garden Street from the mill. And he probably either played or go to games. So that tells me the next question: where would the Graham team play? Where did the Graham?
Yeah, they were probably playing at what's now Tom Zachary Field behind middle school.
So Trevor wouldn't have had a team, you don't think?
Well, Oneida was the older. So anyway,
I know that before the Burlington or before the Alamance Indians moved to the stadium of Fairchild, they were playing at the field there behind what's now middle school. And I think that field had been used for baseball for a long time. Maybe before the school.
who built that?
Good question. That I don't know.
As the high school was when was the high school built?
48,
48.
47, 48.
And we lived on the East Street, so when they were playing ball up there, you know, during the summer, like it wasn't high school kids.
Okay, it was Bill team.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course they had a canopy over wooden bleachers for the canopy. So that was
You know, like a wood canopy or like a cloth canopy, like
no,
a shade
wood.
canopy?
Well, it was like wood framed with I don't know what kind of wood.
Canvas.
it had.
Okay.
But it burned.
Maybe sheet
At some
metal
point
or-
it burned,
okay.
you know, and they
Yeah.
still had the bleach.
Okay. All right. I might have to find out a little bit more about that one. I wound up getting pretty focused on the subsequent ballpark. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, you know, that's
And I do know, you know, one of the things that's really unusual about Swepsonville too is that, you know, sometimes you hate to even say the F word when you're talking about old ballparks, but fire did in most of them. You know, there was a great big old ballpark in Thomasville that the local rumor mill says somebody in the neighborhood who didn't like the noise burned it down in the 70s. And most of the old ballparks, I mean, I know the one in Edenton is still standing. There's a great old wood ballpark in campus at Catawba where they still play college baseball. That's a wood grandstand. And the one down in Substance, most of the wood grandstands at some point succumb to fire. So that's one of the other things kind of remarkable that the one in Substance don't survive.
And one other point or question. Elbanks Holt owned an item mill and he lived over here across from the police department.
Okay.
And he owned all that land. I was told that there was a ballpark probably before the Zachary ballpark was built.
Okay.
On that land, you know, there's like a big oak tree there that's like from that point west was the ball field.
Okay.
Now, and he may have built, you know, set up that ball field for his deal.
Right.
So that's just, you know,
Yeah, that's interesting to know. It's interesting to know. And again, the early stuff, like in the 30s, the coverage is mostly standings reports and just little game summaries. Very rarely did you see a lot of pictures. I will say the local ballpark, other than I was focused on the Substantive one, but doing research in the county and looking at newspaper records and the archives, one of the other things I found a lot of record of was the old Hillcrest ballpark. And so I don't know if any of you all remember that one in the stand, you know, where the Blessed Sacrament School is now. That was Hillcrest and the Hillcrest School. And do you remember the ballpark that was there? Yeah, that's right. So that was kind of before Fairchild was built. That was the big stadium in town. That was the big field. Apparently had a small grandstand. Apparently had a fairly small. It was a fairly small field. It wasn't probably professional dimensions. You can see the size of the piece of land it was on. But that ballpark's claim to fame, aside from it was, well, so before the Fairchild Park was built, some of the Alamance Indians team played in Graham, the ballpark we talked about. They also some years played at Elon, if they could get a better lease at Elon, and the old wood ballpark that used to be right by the train tracks there. They also some years played at the Hillcrest Field. So a lot of it seemed to be where they could get a deal and get the dates. But that Hillcrest Park, Ted Williams played there, and some of you may remember there's some newspaper archives of this too. When Ted Williams signed up to serve his country in World War II, he was sent to a pilot training program based in Chapel Hill, and a lot of the professional athletes that volunteered for service were made into pilots. With the assumption was they probably had good skills, hand-eye coordination, and so there was a whole team, mostly big leaguers, down in Chapel Hill at this training program they're running on the university campus. They called themselves the Cloudbusters, Cloudbuster 9. And they would travel around and they would play other local teams. And it was usually a fundraising effort to get people to buy war bonds. So you would get free admission to the game if you bought a war bond, or you could buy a ticket, at which during the game they would try to sell you war bonds. And Ted Williams would come and play. And he did, I think one game, he had a couple home runs in that ballpark. And he played there a couple times. And there's also records of going to almost all the other towns within an hour or two of Chapel Hill and playing these Barnstorm games, playing local teams. There's actually, and now you said you read the book. Was it the book that Anne? What's Anne's name? Yeah, it was the name of the book, right? Yeah, it came out pretty recently. I talked to Anne some. Did you talk to her when she was in town? You come across her now? Well, Anne, the woman who wrote this, and I'm struggling to remember her last name, but there is a book that came out pretty recently. She's the woman who wrote this book is the daughter of her father was the bat boy for that team.
Okay.
And so when she went through all her dad's stuff when he passed away, she found this treasure trove of photos and scorecards and all this stuff that her dad had had. They lived in Chapel Hill. And so she started digging into this and wrote this great story about this Cloudbuster 9 baseball. I could see it make a great movie. I mean, anyway, so that's an interesting piece of history with the Hillcrest ballpark. And that was at some points home for baseball in the county. So, but yeah, it'd be an interesting research project to try to plot all the old mill parks because I'm sure there were others. I think most of these mills if they're playing their high level games at someplace in Hillcrest, I'm sure they had a field adjacent to the field. So, Randy?
Yeah, so along the Haw River Trail at Stacks Island Park, in that park, they had a ball field the mill workers went over. And you can see the pitching mound in the woods there at
that right?
Stacks Island
Okay.
Park.
Okay.
Nolan actually told us about that. I think there's some signage along the trail so it
Okay.
can
And
point it
where-
out
that's
to
where
you.
on the trail?
Stacks Island Park,
Okay.
the Haw River Trail.
Okay.
And Ann Keene is the
Yeah,
Arthur.
That's right. Yeah,
Mhm.
very good. Thank you. Yeah. So I've actually been reading that book. It's if you're a baseball history nut, it's fascinating. Stories of all these people coming together. So that's interesting. We have to find out about the pitcher mound on Stacks Island. Okay. Right. Thanks. Yeah. See, I knew I'd gather some information here too. Add to this stuff. Yeah.
You may have already answered this. You people being late,
Oh, it's okay.
I couldn't figure out where you were.
I'm glad you're here.
I'm glad you too. Anyway, talk a little bit about, and you may have already said this, a little bit about Tom Zachary, Graham Team.
I don't know a lot about Tom Zachary, except I do know that he is regarded as the first Alamance County person to make it big, if I remember right. But the teams he played on, I don't know a ton about that. Do you know much about?
Well, he was on Graham's team.
Right.
And, my father was on F2
Okay.
and down with Miller.
Okay.
And
Yeah, that's the name you were trying to come up with before, right?
Yes.
Well, Tom Zachary, I mean, everybody knew who he was. And he went on to Major League. One of his thing in his war is he struck out Babe Ruth maybe 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also, one of his top home runs came off Tom Zachary.
Right.
And so Tom.
And I can't remember if it was the called shot or if it's, but I do know that Zachary was a very good baseball pitcher.
Yeah.
But he was probably best known historically for having given up a big home run, Babe Ruth.
Yeah, he didn't like that. You know,
Probably didn't,
I
right?
don't talk about Tom.
So who sponsored that team? You know, was that a mill team or was that?
I understood it was connected with the house.
Okay.
Connected with the water.
And I brought you a photo.
Okay.
I think you may have a black and white picture of that team.
Okay.
I have a photo of it, but it's one of my color on.
Okay.
And some of you might like to see that. I brought one to give to the museum. I'm not sure. I can pass it.
Anybody here?
Yeah.
Well,
It might be a fight over it. Let's see this.
this is Tom Zachary. And
Okay.
that's my dad, Talmadge Nelson.
Uh-huh. Okay.
That might be my uncle, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay.
And anyway,
That's beautiful. It really,
thing.
it really brings it to life, seeing a little color on it, doesn't it?
This is one museum they have.
That's
I don't
terrific.
think we've got any, do
And
we?
that's really-
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much.
Good.
Now, have you placed where this, is this on the steps of the school, I'm guessing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, the school.
Okay.
In 1920, through the school. In elementary.
Graham was still the same. It was like the first.
Okay.
He's the big one on the front.
Yeah, this one, right, with the G fully showing on his shirt, right?
1, 2, 3, 4.
You said that's him?
identify the people.
Yeah, that's what I'm told.
Okay.
That'll do
Okay.
that.
I might be
Let
wrong.
him go down.
Everwood Stokes has his in his book, the same.
I think it's in one.
Yeah, it is.
Now, my daddy, Talmadge
Which
Nelson,
is Talmadge.
that's him, and he looked like he always looked. He lived to be 105 and a half,
Okay.
and he was, as you arrived, and he was walking.
Better shape than me.
105,
Uh-huh.
and,
Oh,
anyway,
which
he
one
got-
is Tom Zachary?
I'm told it's this one, Big T.
Well, and it's interesting too, when you look at a picture like this, people during that you would look at this picture today and say, oh, they look too old to be a high school team. People looked older than I think at earlier
I
ages. Is that
know.
what you think?
We've got a lot of
Yeah,
yearbooks
life was
upstairs
harder
and
and-
they all look
Yeah,
so
when you were
old.
18, you looked like a 25-year-old.
Yeah.
A lot of the old pictures look that way. So this is terrific. I
Which
appreciate
one?
this. I'd like to talk with you afterwards and get more information. Right, yeah.
Yeah.
This
Historians might get a little peeved at that.
This is
Yeah.
Mr.
Still,
Nelson.
it's really nice. Doesn't bother me either.
Is this one?
Okay.
Or this one? This one.
This just brings it to life. Yeah, exactly. Okay, all right. Well, let's talk afterwards about this. I want to gather a little more information.
I have a story. I grew up down 54, but my brothers played for Swepsonville in Little League.
Okay.
So we all the kids rode their bikes for about 4 miles at least. I was just trying to sit here and decide around to Swepsonville while they practiced or played. Of course, you talking about the blacks, where were they playing? Girls, there were no sports for girls, no Little League, no
yeah, that's
anything for
true.
girls. So we just had to watch our brothers and our neighborhood boys and whatever play.
Right.
So anyway, we would go down there, you'd stop at this little store there on the corner and get a drink and whatever. You know, none of us, I'm a parent right now with grandchildren. I would never, ever have let my kids do that, even in the 80s when my kids were little or now with grandchildren. But yet we did, our parents let us, that was our entertainment. So, but the field is very well taken care of. The splash ball you're talking about, I wonder if it's not into the pond instead of the river. There's a huge pond there. If it didn't go in the pond.
Could be, but Raymond told me it went in the river.
River.
So I
Well,
don't
he
know
would
if saw
know.
or if
He
he
would
was
know.
relaying what he'd been told.
Yeah.
So you take all these things with a grain of salt. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to appreciate.
Well,
a good story.
Swepsonville, I went to Wilson and then to Southern, but I used to beg my parents to move to Swepsonville. Let's move to Swepsonville because that was the place to live. That's where everything happened. It was such a tight community. And so they have taken the firemen, my family, they're still firemen for Swepsonville. They take good care of that stadium. They go down there and
Yeah, that's
spend time
Yeah.
there. So,
Yeah, well, that's
But yeah.
Well, again, it tells you a little bit of something. You know, the ballpark is a community hub.
Yeah.
If it's used the right way.
but
So that's,
nothing for girls,
that's a
nothing for
testimony to
girls.
that.
Ever come across any history on the Glencoe baseball team or any of those mills on the north side? Because there was Carolina Mill. I don't know if they had a baseball
Right.
team, and then you had High Falls, which later became Copeland.
Right. Now, I do know that some of the standings I found in the Central Carolina League, which is the textile league in this region,
Yeah.
that it does have references to Glencoe. So there were Glencoe teams in that, but I haven't seen a lot more than that. I mean, I do know that the historical displays up at the Glencoe Mill Village there's at least one of them that has a baseball team photo in it.
Yeah, we've got a couple of, I work there now.
Right, yeah.
But
So,
we've
yeah,
got a couple of
I
trophies.
knew I was going to do something new, but for everyone else, I know there's a photo there. But I don't know a lot more about it. Again, I was trying to, of course, as an academic, you have to publish your stuff once in a while, and you gotta, you can go down a rabbit hole, wind up with all kinds of stuff all over the place, or you can try to stay focused and get something you can get written. So, so I tried to stick as close as I could to Swepsonville and stuff. But it'd be interesting to know more about Glencoe.
Also, another question: do you ever come across any memorabilia or artifacts, so to speak, of, like, say, the Cleveland Indian, not Cleveland Indians, Burlington Indians, or any of that time frame? Because we're always looking for artifacts to enhance the story about Mill baseball.
I'll have to take a look. I mean, I have some stuff from the modern era, some things in my files, team photos,
Yeah.
some things like that. That's not exactly
I mean, I've got a T-shirt from the Burlington Indian.
a fit for what you're
Indians.
looking for, yeah. But I do know that I have, somebody gave me years ago, it's a paper record, it's a Carolina League record, and it's from that earlier Alamance Indians incarnation. That's probably the oldest local thing I've come across. So yeah, I probably don't have anything to attribute. If I did, I'd be happy to have it displayed. So
You ever come across any history of wasn't there a team called the Burlington Bees?
Yeah, yeah, I have a team photo with Burlington Bees in the 40s, and of course, one of the other names, of course, I talked about Burlington baseball history. You kind of shouldn't talk about Burlington baseball history without mentioning Jack McKeon. Jack McKeon came here to be. He was a player. He was a catcher for the Burlington Bees. Then he went somewhere else. I think he was in Kansas, and then he came back to Burlington. He became a player coach. He met Carol Isley, who became Carol McKeon, and settled here. But the Burlington Bees, they played in Graham, even though I think they were called the Burlington Bees. I believe that year he was there, or parts of 2 years. But that was an earlier incarnation. I know they were Pirates affiliate at some point, because I remember Jack telling me about getting a phone call from Branch Rickey, who was running the Pirates at the time, telling me he had to go to Kansas, and then getting a call in Kansas telling me he had to come back. I have my chronology mixed up, but anyway, so that was an earlier. That was before the Alamance Indian. So that's 50s. Yeah. But I do have a Burlington Bees team photo somewhere in this game. I don't even know who's in it. I don't think it's one of Jack's years. But they like to keep branding simpler back then, because if you're the Burlington Bees, all you had to do is stick a B on the hat. You were done branding, right? So no fancy embroidered logos back then. So, but that's about as much as I know. So again, if you know more, have more, I'd love to hear about it.
How many people now, how many are on your current summer league? How many players are there? 20, 20, 50,
You're talking like how many are on the
155?
roster for the team?
Yeah,
Burlington?
what,
I think they'll
what's the
run
size of
with somewhere between a 25 and 30
Okay.
person roster. I don't remember exactly. It tends to be more in summer college baseball than pro baseball, because you have to be very careful about the innings guys that you have. College coaches get really mad if you overuse their pitchers in the summer. And for a pro team, the pitchers belong to you. You can use them however you want. So I think they carry a little more. Like a pro roster would be 25. And I think there's a few more than that on the current Appalachian roster. So anyway, I will say also, I don't want anybody to take what I said about the sock puppets as any kind of criticism of what they're doing up there. It's a lower level of baseball, and it's a shame we lost our affiliated team. It was certainly a higher level of talent, higher level of baseball than what we see. But the guys running the team and the things they've done in the community, they're doing a great job. And this is the highest level of baseball that's available to us now. So they're certainly worthy of our support. I go to the games. There's not as much. There's not the future big league talent on the field that there used to be when you watch the Appalachian League. But it's still it's great fun. You can go get Cracker Jack, good item there, Brian. Randy told me that was your idea, so good touch. Good touch, definitely. Yeah, Brian comes up with a good one. I know Mary told me different, but I'll take your word.
I said once in a while, man.
Once in a while.
Get that?
But anyway, but we're certainly, I would say in this county, we're very fortunate we still have a level of baseball, because we couldn't line up nothing when Major League Baseball cut down the number of teams we're going to have. So at least we have a relatively high level of baseball. We have a good management group there. It's Ryan Kerr, who actually, small world, Ryan was a student of mine at Elon way back when I first started teaching part-time there, when I was still working at, I think I might have been in my last year at the Indians. And so he was a student of mine at Elon. Then he went on to become general manager of the team when it was I guess it was still the Indians. And then he went to Florida for a while, did real well with the single A team down there. And he came back. He actually bought the team in Burlington just in time to see the league get axed for minor league baseball. But he, again, kind of like Miles, he honored this community and joined this new version of the Appy League. And so Burlington does have a hometown team, which is obviously a tremendous thing to have, and much better than no baseball at all. So certainly I get out there and support the sock puppets pretty regularly.
What team was the Burlington Indians or Royals?
Well, the Indians and the Royals, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in the old Appalachian Rookie League, you actually had to carry the parent team's name. So we would, when I was general manager, I would sometimes get people calling me, trying to draw me into the debate about Native American sports teams, which, you could argue that one all day. But I said, hey, we have nothing to do with it. We're required by league rules to carry our parent team name. So every league, every team in that league during that period was the same name as their parents. So it was the Pulaski Yankees, and the Danville Braves, and it was all big league names, and logos, and uniforms. It's actually good for us in a lot of ways because we didn't have to buy uniforms. They used hand-me-down, Cleveland hand-me-down, and then when Kansas City was there, they were using hand-me-down stuff there. The big league teams wear uniforms for a very short time, then they get pushed down the chain. So we have lots of very good uniforms without having to pay for them. So that was a nice thing.
Both of my boys played VFW ball. Is that, I know we don't have a team.
Yeah, you're
but
talking, yeah,
is
Legion
that
ball.
still going on in
Yeah,
other
Legion ball
places?
still exists, but it's really been
That was a
been
big-
damaged by travel ball. I mean,
Yeah.
the kids that are serious about baseball will still play travel.
Yeah,
Used to be if you're a good high school player, you went and played Legion ball. That was
in
your summer
college,
ball.
they played, and Jack Tim was a coach for a while, had
That's
a
right.
lot of
And so
influence
that's
with
mostly
it.
withered away. I know Alamance County doesn't have a team, but I do know.
They didn't have a coach, so it kind of
Right.
fizzled out.
Now, I do
Couldn't
know
get
at least one Alamance County resident who's playing Legion ball for Greensboro folks. Because he knew some folks there
Yeah.
and played travel ball with some kids.
Well,
and invited.
it was
So it
not,
still exists,
yeah.
but it's not, you
Yeah.
don't see it here.
yeah, you had to try out. It wasn't a matter of paying
Right,
to play.
exactly, yeah.
You tried out
Yeah, it
and you
was
better be good.
It was pretty
Yeah,
high level
you
baseball.
better
I mean,
be
really,
good.
they were like county all-star.
Yeah,
But kids have so many choices now.
yeah.
And for the most part, what I've seen, kind of leaning back on my experience in recreation, I think Ryan and Randy would agree. Parents want what they want, and they don't want their kid to have to try out and maybe make a team and maybe play where the coach thinks they should play. They'd rather go sign up for a travel team where they're
Yeah.
going to write their check and they know the kid's going to be in the lineup at third base every day, wherever they think he should be. So it's a different era
Yeah.
in that way. But yeah, Legion baseball's still around, but really diminished.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's fine.
Have you ever, talking about the artifacts and all, have you ever seen or heard of a baseball bat made out of cherry? The reason
Cherry, I have,
because we had one in our family, not knowing what it was until after we got rid of it. It was my grandfather's
Okay.
bat, and my mother inherited it, but it was probably made by a guy who was a woodworker.
Okay.
Maker.
I was gonna say furniture, because cherry would use furniture, right? Is it
Yeah,
really
yeah,
heavy,
but
dense wood? Was it a really heavy bat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but it was red. It was a reddish color.
Interesting.
We didn't know. This
Cherry, I haven't heard of. I mean,
And that was a local thing. That's
Yeah.
why I say he used to Chapel Hill and he made them and probably teams who used them.
Right.
I've never.
I would guess it would probably be stronger, kind of like, a lot of major league players swing maple bats. Maple's harder, doesn't break as much as ash, and some people feel like it's better. Traditionally, baseball bats have been made of ash, and it's gotten harder to get good ash, and so people started advancing maple in recent years. But I've never heard of a cherry wood bat. So get your hands back on that. Let's talk. Let's take a look at it. I would imagine it would also be back from an era, they used to swing heavier bats too. Everybody wants light bats and bat speed. And they used to swing, you watch the old footage and you see the effort with which they're pulling the bat through the strike zone. It's like Babe Ruth swung like a telephone. This bat was gigantic. Nobody swings heavy bats like that anymore. But I bet that cherry was a real club.
It was solid.
Yeah.
Yeah, so from a business perspective, is it realistic, say 10, 20 years down the road, that Burlington could potentially get a stadium as nice as, not to put Burlington down, I grew up here, so, but you get spoiled when you go to Durham, you go to Greensboro, you go over to Winston-Salem. Is that a money thing for the community to have to invest in, or is that more of a major league?
Well, one thing about the major leagues they can find is they're not going to put penny into the local stadium.
Right.
They are, it's a loaded term. I don't want to use the term carpetbaggers, but I mean, they're going to get whatever they get from local
Yeah,
government.
just like NFL, yeah.
Yeah, so there's no help from elsewhere. If you wanted something like that in your community, you're going to have to pay for it yourself. I think when I was the general manager of the team, at that point, it still looked like the Appy League theoretically had a, was sort of an assumption that baseball teams were forever, because minor league baseball has been in its current form for 100 years.
Yeah.
And so at that time, I thought it was worth considering maybe trying to build a new ballpark downtown and get some suites in it. You know, not probably as big or elaborate as Greensboro's, but something of that quality, but maybe a little smaller. I think it would really be hard to make the economic case for it now with this lower level of baseball. I think this level, and it's very unlikely since there's fewer teams, it's very unlikely we're ever going to get back into the pro game. There's some cities in our area like Gastonia and High Point that have gone in for independent baseball. I don't know that that's significantly better for the community. You know, I mean, High Point spent almost $40 million building that stadium. That's a lot. I mean, I love baseball.
Is that a university?
But that's a lot of money. No, the city
But it's soccer and
I
everything.
mean, the university has some involvement, but I think mostly to be a cheerleader for the project, using some. Gastonia built a ballpark downtown. They were originally building it for the Coastal Plain League team that was over there, and then an independent league came in, kind of swooped in and snatched it up at the last moment. But if you have independent baseball, you also have to generate all those player costs in your own market. So not only have you spent, Gastonia, they spent, I don't know, $20 million to build a ballpark. Then every year you have to not just generate enough money to pay the light bill, the bus, and the hotel. You also have to pay enough money to write checks to the players and coaches, which you're talking another $500,000 at least out of your income going to these guys. Again, there's a little more money circulating around because these guys get paid. They're going to live at a little higher level. They're probably going to be there longer because the season's a little longer. But I think for the size of our community and the landscape around us, it wouldn't be a way I would go. I would not do it at all. And I couldn't really see justifying a more elaborate, more expensive stadium. I mean, really, for summer college baseball, the stadium we have is pretty ideal. It's a pretty good fit, a pretty good size. It's going to handle your crowds. That's a nice history. So, but who knows? I could be wrong. I mean, I worked years ago for the single A team in Fayetteville, and when that team left, we put a Coastal Plain League team in there in the old ballpark. And I always felt like Fayetteville would probably never get back in minor league baseball. And they built a beautiful new downtown stadium, spent a ton of money. Now, of course, that's also a growing city of 300,000 people. Whereas what's all of Alamance County now, 170, 180,000 maybe. So in the whole county, not just the city. So, yeah, I think it'd be pretty tough. So enjoy the Burlington Athletic Stadium. Settle in. I think it's what you got for a while.
I did not know the history of it being a gambling stadium.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's really, and if you spend as much time as I did there and you look at some of the way the thing was constructed, particularly some of the stuff that's not visible, like some of the steel girder work inside, you look at it and you say, okay, that wasn't how that was supposed to fit together. That was really jury-rigged together. You look at some of it, you're like, okay, that plate doesn't really fit there, but they made it fit. So it looks
When
like
it came to Burlington, they made it fit.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So it looks like when they disassembled it, I don't know if some things got labeled wrong, or I mean, I'm not saying
I'm
it's
sure
not
they
safe or not in good shape,
Solves to it.
but there's some
yeah.
places where there's like some reinforcement plates on in some spots, and they seem to be the wrong shape, or they have old bolt holes that are left behind, and there would be bolt holes created. So some stuff you look at and say, okay, this was taken apart and put back together again, without a doubt.
See if I can get in.
Anyway, but it's a great old stadium, really unique history, and of course I didn't even mention, they filmed some of Bull Durham there. I mean, how can you not love a ballpark that has some of the scenes from Bull Durham there? I don't know if you guys have watched that movie a zillion times like I have, but that home run that Kevin Costner hits, they have this low shot looking down the third baseline, and he hits it over the Bennett Hocking Plumbing Supply sign. I always think that they should have been paying royalties for that advertising because they were getting national TV on their billboard for 40 years. But it's kind of a neat shot. You can tell the camera was set down. Actually, the cameraman was in the dugout, shooting almost at field level, kind of up. You see this hit and the ball go over the sign, and it's all the Burlington advertisers. And there's not a ton, but there's a number of places there. If you really know the Burlington ballpark, you can recognize. I think that's another kind of neat piece of history. So, yeah, again, we're in a historical museum, right? Enjoy the history, and maybe somebody will bequeath Alamance County, $100 million old stadium, some of that. Probably nobody I know. All right, well, I know we're at time. I'll stick around. I don't have any place I have to be real urgently. The longer I stay with y'all, the longer I can put off grading the last of my papers. So I'll hang around for a little while. Folks have other questions. And if you have other information or people you think I should talk to learn a little bit more about textile baseball, I'm eager to do that. I did mention to Brandy that some of the stuff on the subsequent ballpark, I'd love to work with the museum to maybe create some kind of display, and maybe something that ties into Glencoe too. I'd be happy to work on something there and see if we could, find out a little bit more and maybe do something that could be displayed there.
Are there any books out there on the market of textile mill baseball that you could recommend?
So probably the best one, there's a book about Carolina. Carolina was issued. It started out as a textile league, and it was kind of anchored by the mills in Kannapolis and Concord. And they had such a rivalry between the two of them that they kind of like threw caution to the wind and started just not paying a couple ringers. They started paying everybody. So they basically had professional teams that were playing in the mill framework. And eventually everyone they said there's no salary limit. So they were a pro league that was not officially part of minor league baseball. So they were a mill league. And there's a whole book written about it. I think it was, and they're sometimes referred in historical records as the Outlaw Carolina League, because they were playing professional baseball, but they weren't under the umbrella of pro baseball. And so there's a book written there. But if you look for Carolina League, Outlaw Baseball, Carolina League, or something like that on Amazon or eBay, you'll find it. And it's a really interesting book. It doesn't have much, if any, specific references to Alamance County, but it really looks at the evolution of textile league baseball across the state. And some leagues, like the Bi-State League, which is North Carolina, Virginia, that was started as a textile league, and their level of play got so high that minor league baseball invited them to join minor league baseball, because they didn't really want, if a league was good enough, they wanted them under the umbrella. They wanted to control the whole thing, right? So they didn't want a good league out doing their own thing. They also wanted salary limits, because Carolina League doing their own thing and paying all this money, they were stealing good players from the affiliated minors where their pay was this. The Carolina League would say, we'll pay you this. And so they had some big leaguers playing in that, fringe big leaguers who were getting paid more than they'd get paid in the minors trying to get back to the big leagues. So it's the same as what happened when they cut down to 120 teams. I mean, the people in New York and the people at the minor league baseball office, they're always seeking to control everything, and that hasn't changed.
Did you play baseball?
I played baseball in high school.
I
I was terrible at it.
But
I found
you
it a lot
played,
easier to run
yeah.
into people, so I played college football. But the whole time I was playing college football, I was wishing I was playing college baseball. So, we can't control what gifts we have, I guess, whatever talent we have. So football wanted me, and baseball didn't.
Where you have an interest or you don't.
I'm sorry?
You have an interest or you don't in baseball. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm finding that out. You either care or you don't care.
And I love the game. And I love it as a cultural institution, more than just, watching the game's great, but like all stuff we're talking about, that to me is really the fabric of it. It's what's the part. It's how it impacts people.
I love
connects
Ken
people.
Burns' baseball series. It's really
And that really
informative.
tells the story, not just of the game on the field, but what it meant in our
I love it. Y'all like to watch it.
So, all right. Well, thank you all for having me.
Let's give her
I
a
really appreciate
hand.
it.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan.
You get a copy of that Saber magazine.